Welcome to DarkVerse. I'm Isaac Nightshade. Tonight's story is called Eyes That Shouldn't See. When Marla Hale moves into a quiet coastal apartment, she's looking for stillness, escape, silence, solitude. But the mirror doesn't reflect the present. It remembers futures, and it watches. At first, it's just her reflection, smiling wrong, blinking late. Then come the visions, the warnings, the strangers who know her name, time phrase, reality folds, and Marla learns. The worst truth of all, you can see too much. Eyes that shouldn't see. You're not just looking, you've already been seen. Chapter 1. A room without mirrors. The sea wasn't visible from the window, but Marla could smell it. Salt and something metallic, like rusted railing or wet nails. The air here was always damp, even indoors. It collected under her tongue, clung to her clothes, and curled her hair without permission. She had lived in the city long enough to forget what quiet, coastal towns did to time, how they stretched it, how every moment felt just a little too long. She'd rented the studio site unseen. It had been a photograph online, a blurry one at that, with no more than 2 lines of description: quiet unit, partial kitchen, no mirrors. That last part struck her as odd. The landlord, a soft-spoken man named Ewan, met her at the edge of the lot with a ring of tarnished keys and an apology already forming in the crease between his eyebrows. Had to take the glass out, he said as he led her through the crooked walkway. Some places don't like mirrors. This one's sensitive to energy. Marla didn't ask what that meant. She just nodded. She wasn't here to question. She was here to disappear. The apartment was clean enough, sparse, pale yellow walls, an old kitchenette with rust stains around the faucet, no TV, a narrow bed with sheets folded too tightly, hospital tight. The overhead light was soft and slightly flickery, like it resented being turned on. And indeed, there were no mirrors. Not on the closet doors, not above the bathroom sink. Even the cabinet hardware was matte. Her reflection, it seemed, wasn't welcome. She didn't mind. She hadn't wanted to see her face anyway. The first night was quiet. At first, Marla lay still, listening to the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the ceiling as it settled. The building was old. The pipes coughed and exhaled. She expected those sounds. They were familiar in a way, but just past midnight she heard something else. A knock. Faint. Slow. Rhythmic. Knock. Knock. Pause. Then again. She froze, blankets tucked tight around her body. It came from the wall behind the headboard, inside the wall somehow. She waited for it to stop. It didn't. After a while, it wasn't just knocks. It was a scratching sound, deliberate, not frantic like mice. Something steady, calculated, like fingernails dragged lightly along wood. She didn't sleep. Morning arrived muted. The light filtered through our damp lace curtains. Marla's limbs were heavy. Her head swam. She hadn't gotten more than an hour of sleep, but she rose anyway, body aching in the dull, exhausted way trauma teaches you to accept. She padded across the linoleum to the kettle and boiled water, made instant coffee, stared out the window at the street below, where nothing moved. The town didn't seem to wake up until 10. The apartment felt colder than it should have been. She glanced around, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and stopped. There at the foot of the bed stood a mirror. It wasn't large, just tall enough to reflect most of her torso. A simple wood frame. The glass rippled faintly, as if it had just been cleaned or was still drying. It wasn't cracked. It wasn't aged. But she knew, with absolute certainty, it hadn't been there last night. She hadn't brought it. She hadn't bought it. She hadn't seen a single mirror since arriving. Her first instinct was practical. Maybe the landlord dropped it off. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he thought she'd need one and just left it here without knocking. But that didn't make sense. She hadn't left the door unlocked. She hadn't left the bed, and she hadn't heard a sound. She circled the mirror, touched the frame. The wood was cold, not freshly moved, but left out overnight. It smelled faintly of salt and lavender. Her reflection stared back, tired, pale, hair unbrushed. She hadn't looked at herself in days. Not really. There was something unsettling in it, but she couldn't place what. Her eyes looked darker, not shadowed, just too deep, like someone had dimmed the lights behind them. She turned the mirror to face the wall. That night the knocking returned, softer this time, more persistent. It came from the opposite wall, then the floor, then from directly behind her head. She didn't scream. Screaming felt pointless. Instead, she pulled the blankets up, pressed her back to the wall, and waited for the dark to lift. The next morning, the mirror was back, facing her, centered perfectly at the foot of the bed. She hadn't moved it. She called the landlord, asked if he'd come by, if he'd left her something. "No," he said. "I haven't been to the unit. I never go in after check-in." Pause. "You're not covering any reflective surfaces, are you?" "What?" "Just don't try to block it. It's worse when it can't see." She hung up. For the rest of the day, she left the apartment, wandered the town, walked the coast road until her legs ached, drank coffee at a cafe where no one made eye contact. She returned just before sundown, unwilling to face whatever waited for her after dark. The mirror hadn't moved, but it felt closer. As she brushed her teeth that night, staring into the empty space where a bathroom mirror should be, she swore she saw movement behind her in the doorway. Just a flicker, just a breath. In her dreams, someone stood over her bed, watching, their face obscured. Not a mask, not a blur. Just no face at all. The shape of a person, the presence of an eye. Watching. She woke up gasping, tangled in sheets damp with sweat. The mirror was still there, but this time her reflection was smiling. She wasn't. Chapter 2. The Eyes Behind Glass. Marla stood on the cold tile floor in bare feet, staring at the mirror now propped against the kitchen wall. It hadn't been there when she went to sleep. She was certain of that. She'd moved it yesterday, dragged it with both arms across the floor, careful not to let it touch the walls, not to look directly into it. The mirror wasn't heavy, but it resisted her grip somehow, like it wanted to stay. She'd shoved it into the hall closet and closed the door hard enough to make the wood groan. She had even placed an old suitcase in front of it, just in case. And now, less than 12 hours later, it was here, in the kitchen, centered beneath the window, waiting. Her mouth was dry. She hadn't spoken a word aloud since the mirror first appeared. Not even to herself. The silence had become more than habit. It was safety. Speaking felt like inviting something, naming it. But now, staring at the glass, she whispered, "No." The mirror didn't respond, not audibly, but her reflection blinked half a second after she did. She noticed it, a delay, just enough to feel wrong. She called the landlord again. This time her voice shook, and she hated the sound of it. "I didn't touch anything," he said. "I swear to you, I haven't even been on your floor. You didn't leave a mirror in the kitchen? I told you before, I don't bring mirrors into that unit. I take them out." A pause, and she could hear him breathing on the line. Then, "You should try not to engage with it. If it keeps moving, that's not for you. That's reflex." Reflex. It's seeing itself, too. She hung up before he could say more. She avoided the kitchen for the rest of the day, made tea in the bathroom sink, paced, listened to the wind against the windows, tried to read a paperback she'd brought with her, and couldn't focus on a single sentence. The words unhooked themselves from meaning the moment she turned her head. By late afternoon, she had convinced herself it didn't matter. She would just move it again. She fetched the mirror, turned it around so the glass faced the wall, and lugged it back to the closet. She didn't look into it, not this time, not even accidentally. She backed away slowly after closing the door, hands shaking, palms slick with sweat. She spoke aloud just once more that day. "Stay." That night she dreamed she was sitting at the kitchen table, but not in this apartment, in the city, her old place, the one she hadn't returned to since everything fell apart. She was drinking coffee. Only when she lifted the cup to her lips, it was empty. Then full, then gone. Across from her sat another version of herself. Same posture, same shirt, but smiling. That was the worst part. The smile never changed. It just widened. She woke at dawn and went to the bathroom to splash cold water on her face. As she leaned over the sink, she caught a movement in the hallway behind her. Just a flicker, barely a blur. She looked over her shoulder. Nothing, but something inside her stomach curled. She turned off the light and opened the closet door. The suitcase had been pushed aside. The mirror was gone. It took her less than 30 seconds to find it. Back in the kitchen, again. Only this time it was angled toward the hallway. A deliberate tilt, as if it had been placed there by someone who wanted it, to see something, or someone. She stared at it. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Not panic, but anticipation. Her body remembered something she didn't. She stepped in front of the glass and looked, and froze. Her reflection was wrong. Not distorted, not monstrous, subtly wrong. Her hands were folded in front of her. So were the hands in the mirror. But they twitched, slightly out of rhythm. Her own hands moved, then paused. The ones in the glass moved a moment. Later, fingers tapping, not mimicry, delay. Then came the smile. She felt her lips twitch, not voluntarily, a nervous reaction. In the mirror, she was already smiling. Wide, too wide, as if she'd just heard a private joke. She took a step back. So did the reflection. But as she moved, her eyes tracked downward, past her own mirrored frame. And there, behind her reflection, just behind the shoulder, a figure, too tall, shoulders hunched, head angled as if ducking. Under a low beam, no detail, no face, just the shape of a man standing still, watching, her breath caught. She turned fast, heart leaping. The kitchen was empty. She was alone. When she looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. But her reflection had not caught up yet. It still stared forward, smiling. For the first time, Marla felt afraid in the bones of her body. Not anxiety, not startle, but something deeper. Recognition. This had happened before. Or would happen again. She was never good at telling the difference. That evening, she wrote a single sentence in her journal. The mirror wants me to see something I've already forgotten. Then she crossed it out. She ate nothing that night. She didn't read. She didn't even try to sleep. She sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, and watched the hallway, the closet, the kitchen door. The mirror leaned just out of sight, but she could feel it humming at the edge of her. Awareness, like it had begun breathing. At midnight, she heard it again. The knocking, this time not from the walls, from the glass. Chapter 3. A familiar stranger. From eyes that shouldn't see. There are different kinds of recognition. Some land like a memory, an old perfume, a childhood blanket, soft and warm. Others feel like vertigo, like stepping down onto what you think is the last stair and finding nothing but air. The mirror had started to feel like the latter. By the third day, Marla stopped trying to move the mirror. It had reappeared too many times, always in a slightly different place. Once near the stove, once in the bathroom where no mirror had been before. That time she'd opened the door in the middle of the night and seen herself washing her hands. But she hadn't been washing her hands. She'd been asleep. The reflection had changed, not all at once, bit by bit, like a portrait being redrawn in secret. Her hair was always just slightly off, parted wrong, less curled. Her skin a half shade paler, sometimes with a faint gray tint, like she'd just stepped in from a fog. But the worst of it, the thing that made her stomach pinch and her throat close, were the eyes. They were still her eyes. but too wide, too alert, a little too still. Eyes that didn't blink unless she did, eyes that looked through her. That afternoon the weather broke. A cold rain swept through town, turning the sidewalks into oil-slicked mirrors. Marla left the apartment anyway. She couldn't stand to be inside. Not with the mirror sitting in the living room, like it owned the space, watching. She walked without direction, coat collar pulled high, face tilted downward. The sky hung low. It always did here, as if the clouds knew how heavy the town was and tried to press it into the sea. Eventually, she found herself inside the small cafe on the corner, the one with fogged-up windows and chipped white mugs. She hadn't been there before, but it felt like she had. There was something about the bell above the door, the way the floorboards dipped near the counter, the smell of scorched milk. The woman at the register didn't speak, just nodded and handed her a mug of black coffee, as if she'd ordered it weeks ago and was only now coming to collect. Marla sat at a table near the window. She sipped, watched the rain, and then, without a sound, someone slid into the seat across from her. A man, late 40s, maybe early 50s, clean-shaven, quiet eyes. He wore a charcoal coat that glistened with rain. Marla opened her mouth to speak, probably to say, "I think you've made a mistake." But he was already speaking. "Sorry I didn't call before you left," he said. His voice was calm, warm, like someone trying to soothe a startled pet. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." Marla froze. She stared at him, throat tightening. "I'm sorry," she said. "Do I?" "We met last time," he said, smiling gently. "Here, actually. You sat in that same seat. We talked about the ferry, the gulls. You told me about the apartment." She shook her head. "That's not possible. I've only just arrived." "Right," he said. "That's what you said last time, too." Her chest prickled with heat. "Look," she said, trying to keep her voice even, "I'm sure you're mistaking me for someone else. I don't know you." The man's face didn't change. No flicker of confusion, no embarrassment. He just nodded, slowly. Then he reached into his coat pocket and slid something across the table. A photograph, a Polaroid. Her, sitting in that same chair. Same window, same rain, same man across from her. But her face, it was wrong. Too calm, almost vacant, as if someone had painted a face over her real one and forgot to give it depth. Marla stared at the photo. Her hands began to shake. She looked up, but the man was gone. The chair across from her was empty. The photo was gone too. She looked around, heart pounding. No one had moved. Had she hallucinated? The entire thing? Had she brought the photo herself? She left the cafe without finishing the coffee. Back at the apartment, the air felt heavier. The mirror stood exactly where she'd left it, in the living room, near the window. Its surface was dim, as if slightly fogged, though the room was cold and dry. Marla stood in front of it. She stared at herself. At the shape of her. She moved her left hand. So did the reflection. She blinked. The reflection blinked. She tilted her head slightly to the left. The reflection followed. And then, before she could open her mouth, the reflection spoke. Its lips moved. Her body didn't. "You're late," it said. The voice was her own. Soft, measured, but it came from nowhere. Not from the glass, not from the room. Inside her head. "Late for what?" Marla whispered. The reflection smiled, not cruelly, but knowingly. "Every version of you asks that." Her mouth went dry. "This isn't real," she said. "I'm dreaming. You're remembering." The room shifted slightly. The air thinned. Her ears popped, as if the pressure inside the apartment had changed, like something massive had just moved beneath the floorboards. She stepped backward. The reflection stayed still, too still. Then it took one slow, deliberate step forward, into the mirror. Not toward her, but forward. Its face changed. The smile widened. The eyes blinked once, then opened wider. and now she could see something else behind it. Another shape, watching, a taller figure, barely visible, standing just behind her reflection's shoulder. The same position as in the last vision, the same stillness, the same silence, but this time it moved, its head tilted toward her, not her reflection, her, as if it finally saw her standing there, as if it had only now decided. It was ready. Chapter 4. Not all sight is vision. From eyes that shouldn't see, there is a particular kind of waking that feels like falling into someone else's life. That's how it had begun for Marla. Not with a scream or a gasp, not with a nightmare, but with quiet knowledge. A subtle, impossible awareness, like remembering something just before it happens. The first time, it was the dog. She was brushing her teeth, her eyes fixed on the sink. Not the mirror above it. It was still gone, still absent from the apartment as though never meant to exist. There was a flash in her mind, a flicker, no image, just motion, a leash, a door ajar, the sound of a bark. 3 seconds later, through the open window, she heard it, the unmistakable clatter of paws on pavement. A yelp. The neighbor's dog, small, brown, constantly agitated, ran full speed into the road, leash trailing like a streamer. Tires screeched. It wasn't hit. Not that time. But the timing had been exact. And she told herself it was a coincidence. She told herself a lot of things lately. The second time, it happened at night. She was lying in bed, the sheets tangled at her feet, the apartment too warm despite the rain hammering the windows. She drifted, not asleep, not fully, but far enough from the surface of herself to see something. Not dream, not vision, something in between. The harbor, a body, face down, arms, splayed. The water around it oddly still. The image didn't disturb her, not in the way she thought it should. It felt distant, like watching a play through thick glass. Her brain acknowledged it, but her emotions stayed quiet. The next morning she awoke with a tightness in her chest she couldn't name. She turned on the radio for background noise, something human to hold her in place. The broadcast cut in over music, a rushed update. A body has been recovered near the wharf. This morning, believed to be male. Foul play not ruled out. Marla dropped her mug. It didn't shatter. It just rolled. She stopped trusting her sleep after that. Stopped eating much too. Her appetite had gone hollow. Bread tasted like dust. Coffee made her nauseous. Time slipped sideways more frequently now. She'd lose minutes, whole hours. She'd find herself in the hallway with no memory of leaving the bed. Her journal contained entries in handwriting that drifted subtly from her own. She had started writing in present tense by accident, or maybe not by accident. Maybe the tense had changed, not the grammar. The mirror had moved again. She no longer questioned how or why. It was beside the front door now, angled so that it caught her in the periphery whenever she passed. It was always just visible, never full on, never ignored, like it had learned where to place itself for maximum effect. She no longer stared into it. She hadn't since the cafe, since the man who knew her without introduction, since the reflection spoke. But she caught glimpses, unavoidable ones, and what she saw, what she thought she saw, was beginning to unravel her. She was standing in the kitchen, arms wrapped around herself, when she saw the first real vision. It came like a migraine, a split-second warping of light. Sound thickened. The edges of the world rippled. Then, clarity, so sharp it felt more real than the moment it interrupted. The mirror across the room flashed dark, then clear again. And in it, herself, standing in the middle of the apartment, same clothes, same room, but holding something in her hand, something long, thin, shimmering with a wet edge, a knife, and at her feet, though mostly out of frame, was a shape. Someone. Not moving. The vision ended like a door slamming shut. Back in her own body, Marla staggered. She reached for the wall, breath tight in her chest. She tried to convince herself it wasn't real, but she already knew better. She had felt it. The intent in her hands, the pressure in her shoulders, the grim, calm weight of whatever came before or after that frozen moment. It hadn't felt like panic. It had felt inevitable. That night, she made herself stay awake. She watched television on mute, flicked through old journals, lit candles. Anything to keep the edges of sleep from creeping in. At some point, she nodded off anyway. And when she woke, it was still dark, but the apartment had changed. She knew it even before her eyes focused. The air smelled sweeter, fungal, like wet stone and mildew. Her breath felt heavier. The walls pulsed faintly, like a slow heartbeat. And the mirror was directly in front of her, not against the wall, leaning over the foot of her bed. Her reflection looked back, but it didn't match her posture. It was standing, not lying, not sitting, just standing, staring down at her. And in its hand, again, was the knife. This time no blur. This time she could see the detail, the edge. The reflection smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of the lips. Then it raised the knife and stepped forward. Chapter 5. The warning that wasn't from eyes that shouldn't see. Marla didn't remember deciding to drag the mirror into the woods. She only remembered doing it. The weight of the frame biting into her palms, the hiss of branches against her coat, the hush of leaves shifting under her feet. The woods behind the town weren't marked on any map, not officially, but they were always there, watchful, indifferent, trees too old to count, leaning in strange, intimate ways, trunks split and earth, something sharper. Like breath cut short. She didn't check the glass for cracks, didn't want to see her reflection again. Not here. Not after what it had done last night, standing over her, smiling, with something sharp in hand. That hadn't been a vision. It had felt too close, too real. Back at the apartment, dusk had curdled into a sickly gray, the kind of light that made everything look two-dimensional, flat, false. She climbed the stairs on stiff legs, the muscles in her arms burning from the weight of what she'd carried. Her coat was damp, the sleeves dark with dirt. She wanted to shower, to eat, to call someone. Anyone. She just wanted a voice that sounded familiar. When she reached the top of the stairs, her breath stopped in her throat. The mirror was back, leaning against her door, tilted slightly like someone had set it down in a rush and walked away. Mud caked the bottom edge. Bits of wet leaf clung to the corners. Her hand trembled as she touched the doorknob. She didn't look into the glass. Not yet. Inside, the apartment was warmer than it should have been. The windows were fogged, the kitchen light buzzing quietly. The hallway smelled faintly of damp fabric and something floral. Lavender. Or maybe decay pretending to be lavender. She didn't speak aloud, not even to curse. She turned on the faucet and let the water run cold before splashing it on her face. She needed grounding, anchoring, something real. She dried her hands, made tea, then sat on the floor beside her bed. There, half shoved under the mattress, was her notebook. She opened it slowly. Page after page of entries she didn't recognize. Some were in her handwriting, others in something similar, familiar but wrong, like someone trying to mimic her without quite understanding how letters curved when she was tired. But it wasn't the words that froze her. It was the drawings. First, a sketch of the woods, the trees leaning too far inward, a black void where the mirror should have been. Then a crude rendering of her own face, split in two, one side calm, the other twisted. And finally a series of sequential panels like a storyboard. Her waking up, her walking to the door, her finding the mirror, and in the last one, her reflection holding up a hand with no fingers. Marla slammed. The book shut. She rose, stumbled to the kitchen, and reached for her phone. There was only one person left she could call, not because she trusted her exactly, but because there was history and blood. Her sister, Lena. They hadn't spoken much in recent years, not since before the thing with Darren, not since the silence that followed the silence. She hit call, waited. It rang only once. Then, "Hey," Lena said brightly, like they just hung up 10 minutes ago. "You, okay? You sounded weird earlier." Marla blinked. "What? You called me, like maybe an hour ago? You don't remember?" "I didn't call you, Lena." A pause. Static crackled briefly. "You sure?" "You sounded upset. You said something about being followed, about glass. I thought you were just having a—" "I didn't call," Marla repeated more firmly. She walked to the phone's call log, checked. There it was. Placed, 3:41 p.m. duration, 002214. She hadn't touched her phone. "Amras, I think I'm losing time," as Marla whispered. There was silence on the line. Not dead air, but hesitation. The sound of someone recalculating their role in your life. "Maybe you should come stay here for a few days," Lena said finally. "Just until—" "No," Marla said. Too quickly, because something in her already knew. She couldn't leave. The town wouldn't let her. Or worse, the mirror wouldn't. She mumbled something about being tired and hung up before Lena could push further. That night, she didn't sleep. She watched the mirror from the edge of the bed. It didn't move. It didn't blink. But she swore it was breathing. She felt it in the rise and fall of the room, the way the shadows curled, the way her own pulse began to sync with something else. At some point, she got up and moved the mirror again. Not far. Just into the hallway. Not to hide it. Just to create distance. At 3:17 a.m., a knock woke her. One knock. Loud. Not at the door. Not on the wall. But from the hallway. From inside. She rose slowly, heart hammering. The air in the room had changed. She could feel heat and weight. She stepped out, bare feet cold against the wood, and saw the mirror. Back again. Propped upright, facing her room. Only this time, there were no reflections. Just glass. Black. Empty. And then a single wet word appeared across the surface, scrawled as though by a fingertip dragged through condensation. "Look! Chapter 6, Prevision from Eyes That Shouldn't See." Marla hadn't looked directly into the mirror for 2 days, not because she was afraid of what it would show, because she was afraid it would show nothing. The emptiness was somehow worse than the distortions. At least when she saw the wrong version of herself, she felt a kind of tether, an implication of self, even if it wasn't hers. But now when she passed the mirror, the glass gave back absence. Not black, not shadow, just potential. The visions had accelerated. They no longer came in dreams or while her mind wandered. They arrived mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-breath. They layered themselves over the world like old acetate film, crackling and semi-transparent, bleeding into her surroundings. At first, it had just been the people. She saw them as they would be, not as they were. The boy walking his bike up the hill, future bandages lining his face, lip split. The woman at the coffee shop, missing 3 fingers, trying to grip a paper cup. The man at the corner store, Steve, she thought, familiar, always cheerful, always chatty. His left eye swollen shut, blood matting his beard. The worst part was the overlay never blinked. Even as the person moved, smiled, turned, the wound stayed still, a mask of the future. And then the clerk, Steve, was on the news. Local man assaulted in unprovoked attack. Same clothes, same side of the face. Her stomach had dropped like a trapdoor. Now, she could no longer be sure which version of people was real. Even the birds, the sky, the clouds moved one way and their shadows another. Time had loosened its grip. Sometimes the street looked washed out, as though a rainstorm had just passed. 10 minutes later, it would start raining. Other times, she'd feel water dripping down her neck, reach up, and the clouds would still be gathering. Reality had become predictive, or she had. She kept to herself as much as possible. Every time she tried to tell someone, the words thinned in her mouth. She called Lena again, the day after the mirror wrote, "Look on the glass." She tried to tell her about the clerk, about the vision. Lena's response was distant. "You sound like you've been dreaming again." "We don't choose dreams," Marla said. There had been a long pause. "Don't we?" Lena asked. She wandered to the grocery store on the edge of town, the only one left open past dusk. The fluorescent lights felt colder than usual, buzzing like insects trapped in bulbs. She walked the aisles in a daze, picking up objects and setting them back down. Milk that wouldn't expire for 6 more months. Apples that smelled like mildew. A head of lettuce that dissolved in her hands the moment she touched it, only to be whole again when she blinked. There was a boy near the freezer section, maybe 17. Too thin, face drawn. She looked at him and saw the scar before it existed, running from his temple down to his collarbone. A clean cut, not jagged, surgical almost. He saw her looking and smiled. The real boy, not the one with the scar. "You okay, miss?" he asked. Marla opened her mouth. The name came to her uninvited. "Derek." His smile dropped. "How did you—" But she was already walking away. She told herself it was chance, a lucky guess, something, remembered from a name tag she never noticed. But the way he stared after her, she could feel it pressing between her shoulders, heavy and cold, said otherwise. That night, she lit every candle in the apartment. She unplugged the lamps, left the mirror where it was. She didn't want to move it anymore. It was part of the architecture now. She could no more remove it than tear out a wall. The glass had returned to being a mirror mostly. It showed her what she wore, what she carried, how her body moved. But it also showed something else now. A new detail, a blindfold, wrapped tightly around her own reflected face. Even when she wasn't wearing one, the fabric looked rough, raw-edged, stained at the sides with something dark. The strange part, the part that should have made her scream, but instead left her cold, was that the blindfolded version of herself was smiling, not kindly, not cruelly, just resigned, as if she knew. Something Marla didn't, as if she'd already seen what came next. She sat on the floor in front of the mirror for hours, silent, waiting, watching herself. The image didn't blink, didn't move. The smile never faded. When Marla finally stood, her knees ached. The apartment was darker now, though none of the candles had gone out. She turned her back to the mirror and heard it whisper, soft, not words, just a breath, drawn in slowly, held. Then, let go. As she turned back around, her reflection was gone. The mirror showed the room, the door, the walls, but not her. The space where she stood was empty, not distorted, not erased, just absent. And in the center of the glass where her head should have been, the blindfold floated in midair, as if it were waiting to be tied again. Chapter 7. 3 seconds too late. From eyes that shouldn't see, the vision hit just after noon, in the bakery line. The sound of a car horn, sharp and distant. A boy, maybe 7, stepping backward off a curb, one foot still hovering. The mother distracted, the driver not noticing. The moment suspended in a thin sheath of light, the image froze in her mind like a photograph laid across her eyes. She blinked. It remained. Marla left her place in line without speaking. The croissant still clutched in one hand, her coat half buttoned. The doorbell chimed faintly as she stepped into the daylight, disoriented. The street outside the bakery was too bright. Cars crawled past like they were being dragged. People moved in slow motion, their voices blunted by wind and noise. Across the street, the boy from her vision. He was exactly as she saw, brown puffer jacket, one red glove, hair falling in messy curls across his eyes. His mother, tall and narrow-shouldered, stood beside him, tapping furiously at her phone. A paper bag hung from her wrist. Marla froze on the sidewalk. This is the moment, she thought. This is the hinge. She watched the boy shift his weight, left foot lifted, heel hanging off the edge of the curb. Then he looked behind him and stepped back. Marla screamed. Not a word, not a name, just sound, raw, loud, instinctive. She ran, the croissant dropping from her hand, her knees aching as they slammed forward. The boy turned toward her, not startled, not confused. He looked straight at her, no fear in his eyes, just curiosity. The car never came. There was no horn, no screech, no accident. Marla reached him in seconds, still screaming, hands outstretched, and the world didn't move. The mother yanked the boy away, dragging him up the sidewalk. She stared at Marla like she was diseased. "What the hell is wrong with you?" the woman snapped. Marla stood there, breath heaving, her hands still held in front of her like she was trying to catch something falling. She turned to look for the car, sure it would arrive late, that the future was just lagging. But the street remained calm. Buses, tourists, cyclists. Nothing out of place, except her. She walked home with her heart folded up inside her chest, brittle and tight. Every person she passed looked slightly wrong. Too tall, too short. A woman with her mouth on the side of her face. A man with no eyes. She told herself it was the light, the heat, a memory misfiring. But she knew what it really was. The future undone. Or worse, rerouted. By the time she got back to the apartment, the sky had clouded over. The wind had picked up, stirring dry leaves into eddies at the base of her stairs. She didn't remember unlocking the door. But when she stepped inside, the candles were already lit. All of them, even the ones she hadn't touched in weeks. Their flames flickered low and steady, as if they had been burning for hours. She stood in the doorway, her hands trembling slightly. The mirror was in the hallway again, but this time it was facing the wall. She moved toward it slowly, like approaching a sleeping animal. Her footsteps were muffled. The air in the apartment was warm, too warm, thick with the smell of wax and something else, something sweeter, like flowers but not quite. She reached out and turned the mirror around. At first there was only her reflection, tired, pale, still. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes rimmed red. She looked like someone who had been holding her breath for days. Then the image changed, just slightly, a flicker, and there she was, the other Marla. The reflection that didn't match. The one she'd been pretending wasn't real. This version of her was smiling, eyes sharp, lips curved, and then she spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. "You didn't stop it," the mirror Marla whispered. "You started it." Marla took a step back, pulse rising in her throat. "No," she said out loud. "I was trying to help." The reflection tilted her head. "Help who?" The room darkened, though the candles still burned. The walls began to shift again, just slightly, bending in at the edges, like the apartment was exhaling. "You were the last thing he saw," the reflection said. Marla shook her head. He's fine. I saw him walk away. Yes, the reflection said. You saw him walk away. Then her eyes darkened. The smile vanished. Maybe no one else did. A sharp knock broke the silence. At the door, Marla spun around. Nothing, no footsteps, no voice, no movement, but a shadow pressed against the frosted glass near the top of the door. Not a person, something too still, too tall. She turned back to the mirror, but her reflection was gone, gone completely. Only the hallway stared back, and in its center, a small red glove had been placed on the floor. Still wet. Chapter 8, Reflection Without Witness. From eyes that shouldn't see, they stopped making eye contact first, then they stopped speaking, then they stopped seeing her at all. Marla noticed it gradually, at the market, in line at the post office, walking down the hill toward the cafe. The way people averted their gaze, not with discomfort, but with intent. Like their eyes had been trained to pass through her. Like she was something you ignore, not because you're unsure of it, but because you've been warned. Even the air around her seemed thinner, like the town itself was shrinking from her presence. The first real sign came from the woman selling tomatoes. It was late afternoon. The sky had begun to yellow at the edges, and the market stalls were thinning out. Marla approached the table without thinking, her hands buried deep in the pockets of a jacket she didn't remember buying. The tomatoes were bruised, overripe, sweating under the heat of a late spring sun. The woman behind the table glanced up, and Marla caught it, the sharp flick of her fingers, the whispered breath across her lips. A sign of the cross. Not a prayer. A warding. The woman didn't meet her eyes, just nudged the produce away from the edge of the table, as if Marla might spoil it by standing too close. She left without buying anything. As she rounded the corner, she heard two men talking outside the butcher shop, their voices low, but not low enough. Said she's not from here. Doesn't matter. She sees too much. Like the last one. Didn't end well for him either. Marla kept walking. Back in her apartment, the mirror had returned to the bedroom. No longer in the hall, no longer polite. Now it stood directly across from her bed, angled precisely to catch her sleeping face. She hadn't touched it. She would have remembered that. But it was there, unblinking. Her reflection. This. Time gone, only the bed. The wall. The faint silhouette of a window behind her. She stood before it, heart heavy, and stared into the emptiness. "What do you want?" she whispered. The mirror did not answer. The air in the room pulsed once, then fell still again. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the corner of the room with her back against the wall and the mirror staring across from her, silent and vast. At some point, between one breath and the next, she stood. Her body moved on its own. The decision felt less like a thought and more like a conclusion. She walked to the kitchen, found the hammer she kept beneath the sink, unused since the day she arrived. Her fingers closed around the handle, and the weight of it steadied her. When she returned to the mirror, she didn't hesitate. She raised the hammer and swung. The first strike cracked the glass, but didn't shatter it. A single fracture bloomed from the center, blooming like a spiderweb. The second blow brought it down. The mirror collapsed inward, shards skittering across the floor in a bright, chaotic sigh. Silence rushed in, thick and immediate. She dropped the hammer. Her breath came in sharp pulls. For a long moment, she stood there, waiting for something to move, for something to happen, for the world to shift. And then she saw them. The reflections. Each shard of glass caught a version of her, dozens of them, some upright, some sideways, some distorted by curve or fracture, but all different. One shard showed her laughing, mouth wide, teeth wrong. Another showed her crying, eyes swollen, lips trembling. One, small near her feet, showed her asleep, curled in bed, though she stood fully awake. One had her sitting, one had her bleeding, but it was the ones near the center, the larger shards, that made her drop to her knees, because they looked like her. Exactly like her, but only at first. She leaned closer. One of the reflections blinked out of sync, a beat behind her own. The second one, just to its left, didn't blink at all. She stared, and it stared back. Eyes wide, lips closed, expression empty. It did not move when she moved. It did not flinch when she did. It simply watched. And then it smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of the lips that did not belong to her. Marla's hand shot to her mouth as bile rose in her throat. But then another shard flickered, a different version of her. This one was standing and reaching out, not toward her, toward the edge of the glass. Its fingers brushed the surface, and in the reflection, the inside of her apartment began to shift. Walls distorting, light tilting, corners peeling back into blackness. It was no longer just a mirror. It was a door. Marla scrambled back, heart pounding, the sound of her own breath filling her ears. Like water, the fragments of mirror on the floor began to hum, a low metallic tone, subaudible, felt more than heard. Then, movement. Each shard began to vibrate, gently, like something behind the glass was beginning to stir. Each Marla, each reflection, opened their eyes in unison. Some smiled, some screamed, some only stared, and one at the center spoke. No sound came from it, just lips moving in time with a breath Marla couldn't feel, but she understood the shape of the words. She could see what they were. Let me in. Chapter 9, The Eye That Opens Inside. From Eyes That Shouldn't See. The first time she saw it, not in the mirror, but without it, Marla was washing her hands. The water didn't behave like water. It didn't flow. It watched. In the shallow pool pooling in her cupped palms, the surface flexed, not with movement, but with intention. An image flickered across the reflection. Not a face, not quite. More like the suggestion of one, trying to pull itself together from light and memory. The sound of the faucet no longer matched the feel of the water. She blinked, and for just a second, her reflection in the sink blinked after her. Not behind her, not delayed, just separate. She dried her hands on the hem of her shirt and walked back into the kitchen without turning off the tap. The noise comforted her now, anchored her. It was harder to tell what was real in silence. The windows had started showing things too, not always directly, just flickers, scenes from hours, sometimes days in the future. A man walking a dog she hadn't seen before, a woman with a limp dropping a glass jar, a cyclist skidding sideways across the street. Later, sometimes the next day, sometimes only an hour. Each thing would happen exactly as she had seen it. The worst ones were herself. She'd seen her own silhouette fall in the window's reflection once. Just drop, no sound, no buildup. And now, every time she passed that window, her stomach twisted, half expecting to become that version. She'd check the ground beneath her feet, convinced it would already be red. There were no clocks anymore. Her phone was dead, had been for days, though she couldn't remember what had drained it. The kitchen clock stopped ticking sometime around the mirror's second reappearance. The microwave flashed 2:14 permanently, unblinking. Time itself was soft now, malleable. Sometimes she'd find herself sitting somewhere she didn't remember walking to. Once she discovered her hands soaked in soap and didn't know where the sponge was. Another time, she looked up from her notebook and found a page already filled with her own handwriting. It's already happened, but it's waiting anyway. She didn't remember writing that, but she couldn't deny the truth of it. People had started calling her a different name. She first noticed it at the cafe. She hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't ordered, just sat in the corner, watching condensation beat on the window. When the barista brought over a cup of black coffee, she placed it gently on the table and said, "Here you go, Alice." Marla blinked. "I didn't order," but the barista was already gone. Then the woman at the laundromat. Then the man at the bus stop. "Alice," always said softly with an odd note of assumption, not recognition. As if correcting a mistake Marla hadn't realized she'd made. She checked her ID once, just to be sure. She half expected it to have changed, that her reflection would hold up a different card. It still read Marla Hale, but the woman holding it no longer felt like her. The walls had begun whispering too, not audibly, not in the cliché way of voices rising from vents. It was subtler, a pressure in the plaster, a vibration, thoughts that didn't start inside her head, but arrived there, as though transmitted from behind drywall. Sometimes she would turn sharply, thinking someone had touched her shoulder, only to realize the sensation was internal, like being remembered by a place, like being watched from the inside. That night, the note arrived. She heard it before she saw it, the soft rustle of paper against the wood floor, just beyond the door. No knock, no footsteps, just the presence of it. A folded envelope, hand-addressed in careful block letters. Inside, "We tried to close it before you moved in. I'm sorry, no last name, no contact, just the initial." The handwriting was faintly smudged, as if whoever had written it hadn't wanted to press too hard, as if imprinting the words too forcefully might make them more real. She read it 5 times, then again, then once more upside down, looking for some meaning between the lines. Close what? She folded it neatly and placed it on the table beside the notebook. When she sat down, her chair creaked softly. The mirror stood across the room, unmoving, but she didn't need to look into it anymore. She could feel it now, from behind her ribs, as if a second eye had opened inside her chest, quiet and slow and always looking. It watched the things she hadn't done yet. The line between seeing and being seen had eroded. Now when she touched a doorknob, she glimpsed the room after she'd entered. When she sat on the couch, she felt the weight of herself getting up before she ever moved. When she brushed her hair, she saw it already fall to the sink in clumps, though it hadn't yet. Sometimes it wasn't even sight. It was feeling, the sharp memory of a scream she hadn't screamed, the ache of a wound she didn't have, the grief of something she hadn't lost yet. In the mirror that night, she saw herself, the original version, but altered. Her skin was ash pale, her lips bruised, and her eyes, they weren't hers. They were familiar, though. Not her shape, not her color, but she knew them, because they were the same eyes from the water, from the windows, from the walls, the ones that had followed her since the beginning, the eye that now opened when she closed her own. The reflection smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. Then it raised one hand, palm open. Something dark was drawn on the skin, lines and circles, etched like charcoal too, precise for ink. A kind of diagram, a map maybe, or a lock. The reflection whispered something. This time Marla heard it not with her ears but with her body. The voice vibrated in her chest, behind her heart, and the words were, "The door isn't behind you. It's inside you now." And then her chest burned, like a match struck too close to the skin. She gasped, dropped to her knees, clutching her sternum. Her breath caught, her eyes blurred, but the pain wasn't pain. It was opening, something unfolding beneath her bones, like a lid sliding free, a click inside her, and through it. She saw, not through her eyes, but through its. Chapter 10. Eyes that shouldn't see. From eyes that shouldn't see, the door was gone. Where the apartment entrance had once been, a familiar slab of warped wood, its paint chipped and its knobs stiff in winter. There was now only the mirror, full length, seamless. It didn't lean. It didn't rest. It stood, fused to the wall, like it had always belonged there. Marla, or Alice, stood before it, one hand still curled around the edge of her coat, as if she had meant to leave. But now, couldn't remember why. The mirror reflected her, yes, but not quite. The woman in the glass was taller, thinner, maybe. Hard to say. She stood straighter. Her hair looked freshly combed. Her lips twitched into something close to a smile. But not for her, for someone else, or maybe for no one at all. Marla touched the glass. It was warm, not the dead, cold smoothness she'd come to fear. No, it had a pulse now, a softness, like the skin of fruit just before it rots. The mirror breathed beneath her fingertips. And then it opened, not with a crack, not with a shatter, just a slow sigh, as if the barrier between here and there had grown tired of holding. She stepped through. There was no resistance, no shift in air or temperature, no cinematic shimmer, just continuity, one foot, then the other, then the silence. When she turned back, the mirror was gone. The wall was blank, flat. There was no way out. But she didn't feel trapped. That was the strangest part. The apartment was hers. Everything was as it had been. The books, the lamp, the plant in the corner she'd long since stopped watering, alive again, vibrant green, swaying slightly though there was no wind. Even the cup on the table held the same exact ring of coffee at the bottom. She moved through the space slowly, like a visitor in a dream. She touched the walls. They felt thicker. The color the same, but the texture somehow watching her fingers as they brushed across. Nothing had changed, but everything was wrong. It was in the reflection, not in the mirror. There were no mirrors now, but in the glass of the window, the gleam of the faucet, the surface of the kettle. She passed through the kitchen and glanced sideways, and there she was. Not her, the other her, the one from before, the one that smiled too much, eyes too wide, posture too calm. She stood where Marla had just walked, hands folded behind her back, as if overseeing the place, curating it. She didn't move, but she blinked, once, and Marla felt her own heart skip. The sounds were different too. Beneath the hum of the refrigerator, deeper than electricity, quieter than breath, there was another frequency. A whisper that wasn't words, more like a suggestion, something you remember without knowing when you heard it. It fits, doesn't it? Now it fits. She moved to the hallway, where her bedroom waited at the end, lightless and still. But the hallway was longer now, wider too. There were doors where none had been. One was slightly ajar. She felt her hand reach for it before she decided to. Inside was her bedroom, and in the bed was a figure, a woman. Her sleeping. No, not sleeping. Eyes closed, yes, but not peaceful. Too still. Marla stood in the doorway and didn't speak. She didn't dare. The air in the room pulsed gently, like it was being held. The version of herself in the bed breathed in slow, deep intervals. Each inhale sounded like water being drawn through pipes. Each exhale like leaves shifting in wind that wasn't there. "You're here," said a voice behind her. Marla turned slowly. The reflection, the other Marla, the one who smiled too much, stood in the hall. But she wasn't smiling now. She looked tired, not aged, not weary, just done, like a lighthouse that has guided too many ships and no longer cares who crashes. "Is that Me? Marla asked, her voice too quiet, too distant. The other Marla tilted her head. That's who you were, who you're waiting to become. I don't want to be her. You already are. Marla's hands began to shake. But I still remember, she said. I know who I am. My name is Marla. I came here to escape. The woman stepped forward, not threatening, just close enough. Do you know how many of you have said that? Marla didn't answer. The lights flickered. The hallway breathed again. Somewhere behind her, the sleeping version of herself shifted in bed. The sheets pulled tighter around her frame, like the room didn't want to let her go. The other Marla stepped aside, gestured toward the front of the apartment. Someone's moving in, she said. Marla's mouth went dry. What? It happens. Again. And again. It's the door, you see, not just the mirror. You were never looking through it. She leaned in close, whispered, You were being looked through. Marla stumbled back into the main room, her breath catching in her throat. The air felt off, thicker now, humid, like something had recently been born. She looked around, and then she heard it, the jangle of keys outside the front door, a step on the landing, laughter, nervous, young. She moved to the window and peeked out. A girl, 20-something, pale hair, a blue suitcase, her hand reaching for the doorknob. Marla turned back to the reflection, not the one in glass, but the one in her mind, the one that had taken root the moment she'd stepped through. She doesn't know, Marla whispered. The other Marla, calm, composed, eternal, nodded. She will. And then the door opened.